We are here in the Card Player Studios with poker pro Tom McEvoy. Now, Tom won a bracelet in Razz in the World Series of Poker in 1986. Tom, tell us a little bit about how you first learned how to play Razz.
Well, when I first came to Las Vegas, I moved here in 1979, but for 1 year I kind of flew back and forth from my hometown of Grand Rapids, Michigan, testing the poker waters. And I had made up my mind that I was going to learn how to play all games, and Razz was one of them. And that was a very popular game at the Stardust, which I just blew up a few days ago here in Las Vegas back in the 1980s. So I played quite extensively back then.
Great. So why do you think that Razz is considered to be one of the most frustrating poker games?
Well, you're always on a draw, but it's a game, in some respects, it's kind of like what Omaha High-Low Split is today, where you have the best hand and the river card beats you all the time. And like Omaha Split, you're constantly on a draw, as you are in Razz all the time, even when you start perfect. Perfect would be ace deuce street, catching a 4 on the turn, and a wheel, ace deuce 3 4 5 is the best hand. But it's ironic that my book on tournament poker, chapter 13, was Razz, and I'm working on a Razz book, which happens to be the 13th book I'm currently involved in writing in my poker career as far as being a writer. But I will have a little excerpt from my book that kind of explains Razz pretty good.
Let's hear it.
Okay. Razz has always been a favorite of mine because it is the only game in which I have made it to the final table 3 times at the World Series of Poker. And in 1986, I won the Razz title and finished in the top 8 2 other times. Although it is not nearly as complicated to play as 7-card stud or Texas Hold'em, Razz can be far more frustrating. It is a game designed to aggravate people and put them on tilt. In fact, the description of Razz that circulated around card rooms in the 1980s, when it was far more popular than it is now, may be fairly accurate. Razz is not a poker game. It's a disease. Some players are making the same comment today about Omaha High-Low Split, which is another game in which you can enter the pot with the best hand and frequently see a much weaker hand beat you on the river. This kind of frustration can drive any rational, intelligent, reasonably solid poker player to distraction after a while. That's why it is especially important not to lose your cool when things go bad in Razz. Razz has a unique way of making players expose their true colors. It's a great game to study the character of your opponents, how they handle adversity, and what their tilt factor is. Even when you start with 3 perfect cards, such as ace deuce 3, you're still in a draw, even if you catch that perfect 4 on 4th Street. And many times you're going to lose with this perfect start because you need 5 cards to complete your hand. Catching a face card or parrying a couple of times can throw some of the most solid players on tilt. And boy, is that ever true.
That sums it up.
It sums it up in a nutshell. You're constantly drawing in this game. And I can't tell you how many times I started perfect. Some guy calls me with a jack or a 9 showing, and by 6th Street, I've double paired and caught a face card and can't even call because I can't beat a rough 9 no matter what I catch. So it's a game that just drives you to distraction. That's why a player's true colors come out. And I've seen otherwise rational players just go berserk in Razz. Back in the bad old days, players would actually be a lot more abusive towards dealers than they are now. I can't tell you how many times people would throw those cards off the table and bounce them off the dealer's chest. And the last time I ever threw cards myself, which I never, ever have done since, in over 20 years I haven't thrown cards once, was in a Razz game. I got so aggravated I bounced them off a dealer's chest, and I think I felt guilty ever since.
So you'd like to issue an apology to that dealer?
I don't even know who you are, dealer, but I apologize and I'll never do it again.
So let's explain to our viewers the exact objective of the game of Razz.
You're trying to make the best low hand. It's dealt like 7-card stud, in that you start with 2 down cards and an up card and a round of betting, a 4th up card, another round of betting, and then a 5th, and then a 6th up card, and the 7th card is dealt face down. The first 2 rounds of betting, when you have 3 cards and when you have 4th cards, are usually half the size of the 5th, 6th, and 7th cards betting. Okay. So there's 5 betting rounds, same as 7-card stud, and the bets double on 5th, 6th, and 7th Street. And the best hand is ace, deuce, 3, 4, 5. And straights and flushes obviously do not count against you. So you just try to make the best low hand.
Okay, and where does the action start? Since in a stud game it's traditionally the lowest card that's up, where does the action start in a Razz game?
The Razz game is just the opposite. The high card brings it in with a forced bet.
Okay.
And then after that, then it's the lowest card, the lowest hand on board.
Just the exact opposite of regular stud, basically.
Exactly.
So why do you think that a lot of players do prefer to play hose as opposed to horse? They like to omit Razz from the mixed games.
Some of them actually don't even understand the game, although basically it's far simpler than most other poker games. In fact, there's kind of a joke going around about how a monkey can learn how to play Razz. It's not that simple. There is some play to it, but it's a game that just seems to either frustrate, annoy players in some fashion, or they just don't quite understand it because it's not nearly as popular now as it was, back in the 80s when I first learned how to play it.
So is it ever correct to play a hand in Razz when one of your first 3 cards is above an 8, or should all of those hands always be mucked?
No, many times it's correct. It depends on entirely what's the up card of your opponents are. For example, say you start with a 10, especially if it's buried in the hole where they can't see it, and you've got nothing but face cards to act behind you, and you've got 2 other babies to go with your 10, well, babies being, low cards, you got the best 3-card starting hand.
Okay.
So, you have no reason to fold, just the opposite. You want to raise. And sometimes when you want to, like any steal, there may be the high card bring in, everybody's folded around to you, maybe you got a 9 or a 10 in the hole, but the guy next to you has, like, say, an 8 up, or which is kind of a marginal card.
Yes.
Well, if your bad card is not showing, this is a good opportunity to try to steal those antes. And even if you get called, you could improve and your opponent might catch bad on 4th Street. Then you can continue betting and possibly win the pot.
So what about if you have a deuce showing, but you have, say, king, queen in the hole? Is that something that you should get away from, or can you try and bluff with a hand like that if it's the right situation?
I'll bluff with it if everyone has passed to me and I got nothing but the high card behind me, because it doesn't matter what my whole cards are. Say a queen brought it in, and everybody folded, and I got a deuce showing. They don't know I have that king, queen, and so I'll raise 100% of the time there. Now, if I get called, what I do will depend on what happens on 4th Street. If I catch good and my opponent catches bad, I'll continue betting. If it goes the other way around, where I catch kind of a mediocre card and my opponent catches good, I know he's going to keep playing, I'll back off.
Okay. So I know that in stud, the importance of dead cards is pretty high. You have to keep track of what other people had. Is that equally important in Razz?
It certainly is, because many times when you don't see a certain rank out, it's more likely that one of your opponents has that card, or one of those cards in the hole. I'm talking about the lower cards in particular. So sometimes you can actually calculate whether a particular card is paired to your opponent or not. Don't forget, you don't always know what the guy has in the hole. But if there's 3 4s out and your opponent catches the 4, well, obviously that 4 didn't pair him. But say there's no 4s out and he catches a 4, there's a good chance that maybe that 4 did pair him.
Yeah.
So you just kind of have to read the situation, and you understand too that unlike stud, they're not start with pairs too often in the hole. So that means they're going to start with 3 unpaired cards. So you got to kind of factor that in. It's a game of being able to read the players reasonably well, which isn't that hard in Razz, because you always know what the nuts are, just like you do in Hold'em. When you see what the flop is and the turn card, you always can calculate what is the best possible hand at the moment. But you can do that in Razz, which is not nearly as deceptive as 7-card stud, where you can have hidden trips and a lot of hidden strength. Without it being revealed too easily. I actually have, if you want me to kind of go through them,
absolutely.
I have the 10 Commandments of Razz. All right, so if you follow these 10 Commandments,
you'll be a successful Razz player.
Be a successful Razz player. By the way, I'm working on this Razz book with a player that's not really well known, but I think he'll be better known. His name is Dan Abrams. He lives in Philadelphia, and he has spent a lot of time analyzing this game, and he came up with some very good information I think will be very helpful to anybody that chooses to buy this book.
What's the book called?
It's going to be called Championship Razz. It probably won't be out till sometime next year. So,
Well, why don't you tell us the commandments, and you can elaborate on them if you like.
Okay. The first commandment, the name of the game is smooth. That means you want to have 3 really smooth-looking low cards in the hole. Usually you're looking for 3-card 7s or better.
Right.
Although occasionally you'll play an 8 maybe, especially if the 8 is hidden with a ace deuce 3 or excuse me, like an ace deuce 8 or a deuce tray 8, that kind of thing. I'll quite often play an 8 when it's showing. If a 7 raises, I may very well play an 8 if I'm really smooth. But I don't want to play an 8 if I got something like 8, 7, 6. This is a very rough 8, which can get you in a lot of trouble. So, first commandment, the name of the game is smooth. Start as smooth as possible. The second commandment, thou shalt not defend a rough hand if your opponent may already have the nuts. Which means don't draw dead, basically. If your opponent...
Always good advice.
Always good advice in any game. Although there's kind of an old saying, it's okay to draw dead if the pot's big enough. So don't draw to a hand where you can't play it with any degree of confidence, even if you improve, because your opponent may already have you beat no matter what you catch.
Absolutely.
Okay. Commandment number 3: Razz is a game of chasing. So do not automatically call chasers donkeys, because many times you start out smooth and then you catch bad and your opponent catches good. So even though you might have started
with the best hand initially,
now you're chasing him, and many times it's correct to do so, especially if there was a raise and a few other bets in the pot. On 3rd Street, there's a lot of money out there already.
Yeah.
It's okay usually to call a single bet and try to catch up, because you can catch up fast in Razz, or fall behind, as the case may be. The 4th commandment, thou shalt play aggressively versus aggressive opponents and passively versus passive ones. That simply means you meet aggression with aggression. If you're up against passive players, many times I'll slip in the pot a slightly weaker, because they're slipping in the pot weaker. I'm talking about when they're limping in instead of raising. Most of the time, if I'm up against an aggressive player who raises a lot, I'm going to raise them right back, assuming I have a decent
because you have a strong enough hand to be in there if you're going to be raising.
Yeah, because many times they're in there a little weak themselves, because that's their nature. If they get anything remotely playable, and it doesn't always have to be as smooth as some of the other players.
And they'll still come in raising because they're aggressive.
Raising, so I'll go right after them. Commandment number 5, thou shalt play tight or loose according to the ante structure. Now let me talk about that a little bit. Back in the 80s, they used to play a 30-60 Razz game where the ante was only $3.
Okay.
And the bring-in
that was here
10.
in Vegas?
Yeah, it was here in Vegas. That meant that the ante was very small in relation to the future bets. Most of the time in 30-60 games, the ante is $5 with a $10 bring-in. Huge difference.
Yeah.
The smaller the ante, the more reason to play conservative. The bigger the ante, the more reason to take chances. So the ante structure definitely affects your strategy and how aggressive you want to be and how many chances you're willing to take, to go after those antes. The 6th commandment, thou shalt not bet a mediocre hand on the river into an opponent with a bad board but the nut draw. In other words, you may have a kind of a rough 9-8. Your opponent may have a 7 and a 4 showing and a queen jack. Okay, so you know you got your 9-8 made, but you're betting into a guy that if he helps his hand, it's going to have your hand beat. So what happens is, too many times people will bet their 9-8. They're not going to get any action if they're beat, but they're liable to get raised.
Yeah.
And then they got a dilemma. Do they pay off the raise? Where if they check and your opponent bets, now you can make a decision on whether he might be bluffing or not.
You can call one bet at that point, or you can fold.
Or you can fold, yeah. If you're up against a real conservative or tight player, I'm more likely to fold against a loose, aggressive player that tries to bluff a lot, represent hands he doesn't have. I'll have a tendency to call, but in any case, only get one bet invested at the river at the most. Number 7, Thou shalt not enter or continue in a multi-way pot if you are in last place. That's a real good piece of advice.
Now, do you mean position-wise, or do you mean with the cards?
I mean with the starting cards.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Give you a good example. Say you were a high card with, say, a jack.
Okay.
Okay, and you have an ace deuce in the hole. That's the best you can have. And so, say a 5 raised, a 7 calls. Talk about the up card.
Yes.
And an 8 calls. So the 8 isn't that great of a hand. The 7 you have to assume has probably a 3-card 7. You know the 8 has a 3-card 8, and the 5 probably has a good 3-card hand because he bet into other low cards to act behind him. All right, so you already got in $10, say in a 30-60 game, plus the antes of $5 each. So it only costs you $20 more. It seems like a bargain. You're getting a nice price on it.
Yeah.
You're in 4th place. You don't have to outrun just one hand. You got to outrun 3 other hands. Or I might take a chance with that hand if a guy's in steal position where I'm playing heads up. I'm not going to start out trying to chase 3 guys. That's suicide in Razz, and yet people do it all the time.
Especially because those cards are already out, so you've already lost the 5, the 7.
That's right. That's why I said a little earlier about if you have a hand like 6, 7, 8, a real rough hand, and someone raises, I don't particularly want to chase after that hand because chances are I won't be able to play it with any degree of confidence, even if I catch good and they catch bad. So don't start in last place for sure against in any multi-way pots. Commandment number 8, thou shalt semi-bluff out of position if you're not likely to be raised. I was kind of touching on that earlier when maybe I only got a 2-card hand, not a 3-card hand, but my bad card is hidden in the hole, and I either have just one low card act behind me and the bring in, or just the bring in, the high card bring in. So that's a perfect time to kind of semi-bluff. If I get past the other low card, or if I'm just heads up with the bring in, even though I got one bad card in the hole, well, I know he's got a bad card, so I'm starting at least equal to what he has. And many times, if they have 2 good cards, they're not going to chase, because they're afraid that you might have a 3-card hand. They don't want to get involved. So it's a perfect time to semi-bluff. Commandment number 9, thou shalt not bet in position if there is a decent chance of having to fold on the next street. That's the case where, say you start with a 3-card 8, the 8's showing.
Okay.
And your opponent either raised to begin with or re-raised you. Maybe there was a bring in, you had an 8 with 2 low cards, and he had maybe a deuce showing, for example. You raised, he re-raised. Now, I'm not too thrilled with that because I know he's got my 3-card 8 beat because I got the 8 showing. But I call the raise. Now I catch a 9, and he catches maybe a jack. Well, I know I got the best hand at this point, but I'm drawn to a rough 9-8. He's got a jack, which is still trailing, but for sure he's got 3 good cards on the hole. Well, this is a good time just to check and try to take a cheap card. He's not going to fold, for one thing, and I'm not that far ahead. And if I catch a face card or a bad card on 5th Street, and he catches a good card,
you've got to get out of there.
I've got to get out of there. So this is a good time just to check and
take a free card.
Take a free card because, as the commandment just said, I may have to fold on 5th Street.
So why put more money in the pot? Makes sense.
And here is a commandment that's a little bit controversial, but not bad because you want to add some deception to your game. That is, thou shalt limp in early position with very strong hands. So if I got 3 cards to a wheel, that's 3 cards below a 5. Say the bring-in's on my right, and there's some other low cards out behind me. This is a good time to limp in, especially if some of the cards I need are not showing in other people's hands. So in other words, my hand is real live, and I got 3 wheel cards. Good time to limp in. One of 2 things will happen. It'll either encourage weaker hands to come in behind me, or someone will think I'm kind of weak and raise themselves. Now I can re-raise.
Yeah, that's what you're looking for, right?
That's right. Get some action. And in there when I know I have the best of it.
Great. So anything else you'd like to tell us about the game of Razz or your new book that's coming out?
I think it'll be the new Bible on Razz. It's made a resurgence in popularity because of the horse tournaments and the horse games that are now more and more widespread, where Razz is one of those games. And online, especially at Poker Stars, who I represent, I play Razz almost every day.
Wow.
And they have 30, 60 games, 10, 20 games, 5, 10 games, 3, 6, 2, 4, all the way down the line.
All for Razz players.
Yeah. So Razz is definitely making a comeback. And it's not going to be a big, huge bestseller, like some of these Hold'em books written by expert players.
Smaller demographic.
Exactly. A smaller demographic, but it still would fill a niche in the market. And I still like the game. I really enjoy playing the game, even though sometimes I want to either throw the mouse off the wall or tear up the cards at a casino. I restrain myself. I haven't broken any mouses left yet.
Great, Tom. Thank you very much for being here. This is Lizzie Harrison with Tom McEvoy for Card Player TV.